The hidden struggle of a brave girl. The warm glow of the setting sun filtered through the large oak tree that stood sentinel over a modest suburban home. Inside, the laughter of children filled the air. James Thompson, a single father, stood in the kitchen flipping pancakes, a weekend ritual that brought his small family together. His 8-year-old daughter, Emily, watched eagerly from the counter. Her little brother, Ben, still groggy from sleep, sat rubbing his eyes at the breakfast table. "Daddy, can I help?" Emily asked, her dark brown eyes shining with excitement. James smiled warmly at her. "Of course, sweetie. Can you grab the syrup from the fridge?" Emily hopped down from the stool with a smile and skipped over to the fridge, grabbing the syrup with both hands. Her father marveled at how responsible she had become in such a short time, always eager to help and make things easier for him. It had been 2 years since their lives were upended by the tragic loss of their mother, Karen, to a sudden illness. James had thrown himself into raising his 2 children, doing his best to give them a stable, loving home. As James served pancakes, the children chattered away about the day's plans. But today was different. Today, they were about to meet someone who could change everything. For months, James had been seeing someone new. A woman named Olivia. She seemed like the perfect match. Kind, intelligent, and patient, with a sincere interest in his children. James had been cautious about bringing Olivia into their lives, wanting to make sure the kids were ready for this next chapter. Emily finished her pancakes quickly, her stomach swirling with both excitement and nervousness. "Daddy, do you think she's nice?" she asked hesitantly. James knelt down in front of her, smoothing a loose strand of her curly hair behind her ear. "I do, sweetheart. I think she's very nice, but what's most important is how you and Ben feel. If you're not comfortable, we take things slow. There's no rush." Emily nodded, trying to be brave for her father's sake. She had been the one to step into the role of mom for her younger brother since Karen had passed. It hadn't been easy, but Emily took the responsibility seriously. She loved Ben more than anything and wanted him to be happy, even if it meant big changes were coming. Later that afternoon, James paced nervously in the living room as the sleek black sedan pulled up in front of their house. He wiped his palms on his jeans, hoping this day would go smoothly. Emily stood by the window, peeking out from behind the curtains, watching as Olivia stepped out of the car. Olivia was tall and striking, with dark hair that framed her face perfectly. She wore a warm smile as she walked toward the front door, carrying a small gift bag. James opened the door before she could knock. "Hey, Olivia," he said, his voice full of warmth. "Come on in." As Olivia entered, she immediately knelt down to Emily's height, holding out the gift bag. "Hi, Emily. I've heard so much about you," she said with enthusiasm. "I thought you might like this." Emily hesitated but took the bag, peeking inside to find a new art set. Her face lit up. "Thank you," she said quietly, still unsure but polite. Olivia turned to Ben, who was clinging to James's leg, his eyes wide with shyness. "And you must be Ben," she said softly, not pushing him too hard. She reached into her bag and pulled out a toy car, placing it on the coffee table. "That's for you, buddy, if you want it." Ben hesitated for a moment before darting forward to grab the toy, clutching it to his chest. Olivia smiled, standing up to join James on the couch, while the children busied themselves with their gifts. The afternoon passed peacefully enough. Olivia was charming, making jokes and asking the children about their favorite things. Emily was quiet but polite, though her guard never fully lowered. Something about Olivia made her feel uncertain. Maybe it was the way she kept glancing around the house, her eyes lingering on the more expensive-looking furniture, or maybe it was just the strange sense that Olivia wasn't as perfect as she seemed. As the weeks passed, Olivia spent more and more time with James and the children. On the surface, everything seemed fine. She was always polite, always smiling. To James, Olivia appeared to be exactly what their family needed, a mother figure who could help bring love and structure back into their lives. But behind closed doors, Emily began to see a different side of her. It started with small things. When James would leave for work early in the morning, Olivia's demeanor would shift. The warm smile would vanish, replaced by cold indifference. Emily began to notice that Olivia rarely spoke to her or Ben unless James was present. And when she did speak, her tone was sharp, sometimes even mocking. But Emily didn't tell her father. She didn't want to upset him, especially after seeing how happy he seemed with Olivia. One morning, after James had left for work, Olivia stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed, watching Emily pour cereal for Ben. "Why are you so slow?" Olivia snapped, her voice dripping with irritation. "You're 8 years old, and you still can't do a simple task right." Emily froze, unsure of how to respond. Olivia had never spoken to her like this in front of her father. She bit her lip and continued making breakfast, trying to ignore the sting of Olivia's words. Ben, sensing the tension, looked up at his sister with wide eyes. "Leave the dishes in the sink. You're coming with me," Olivia said, grabbing Emily by the arm and dragging her to the living room. "There's a lot of work that needs to be done today." Emily was confused. "But it's Saturday. Daddy said we could go to the park today," she said quietly. Olivia's eyes flashed with anger. "Your father's not here, is he? So we're doing things my way." And that was the beginning. From that day forward, whenever James wasn't around, Olivia made sure Emily was kept busy with chores, cleaning, organizing, scrubbing floors. The woman who had once seemed so kind had become a tyrant behind closed doors. "Don't you dare tell your father," Olivia would say whenever Emily seemed close to breaking. "If you tell him, I'll make sure Ben gets the same treatment. And I doubt you want that, do you?" Emily shook her head frantically, terrified for her little brother. Olivia smiled then, her voice syrupy sweet as she said, "Good. Now get to work." Over the next few months, Emily learned to live with the constant fear. She learned to hide her tears and smile for her father's sake, even as Olivia's cruelty grew more intense. Ben remained blissfully unaware, shielded by his sister's silence. Emily refused to let him know what was really going on. But as much as Emily tried to protect her brother and keep their world intact, she couldn't keep up the charade forever. The weight of the secret was becoming too much to bear. Every day, the strain showed more in her tired eyes, in the quiet sobs she hid behind closed doors. How much longer could she keep up this double life? How much longer could she endure the cruelty before her father finally saw the truth? And what would happen when the truth finally came out? The cracks began to show. The days dragged on, blending together in a blur of fear, chores, and whispered threats. Emily's once carefree existence had been overshadowed by the looming presence of Olivia, who only revealed her cruel side when James was away. Olivia had found her footing in the Thompson household, using charm and deceit to manipulate James, while her true colors were reserved solely for the children, primarily Emily. Every morning was the same. As soon as James left for work, Olivia's smile would fade, her mask slipping off as easily as one would remove a coat. "Emily, get up. There's no time for you to be lazy," Olivia barked one day, banging open her bedroom door. The sudden noise startled Emily awake, her heart already racing before she could even comprehend what was happening. "It's Saturday," Emily mumbled, rubbing her eyes as she tried to wake up. "Can't we sleep in just a little?" Olivia's icy glare made her regret the question immediately. "Who do you think you are, asking for more time to sleep? There's work to be done, and I don't want to hear a single word of complaint. Now get up." Emily swallowed her protest. She glanced over at Ben, still sound asleep in the small bed next to hers. Ben was the reason she kept quiet, the reason she endured Olivia's cruelty in silence. Protecting him had become her mission. No matter how difficult things got, Emily knew she could endure anything as long as Ben was safe from Olivia's wrath. She slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake her brother. The last thing she wanted was for Olivia to shift her focus toward him. As she shuffled toward the kitchen, Olivia thrust a mop and bucket into her hands. "The floors," Olivia ordered, her voice void of emotion. "They're filthy. I want them spotless by the time I come back from running errands. And make sure the bathroom is clean this time. None of that half-done nonsense you tried pulling last time." Emily nodded, biting the inside of her cheek to keep from crying. She had learned early on that tears only made things worse. Olivia fed off her fear, and if Emily let her emotions show, the situation would escalate. So she simply nodded and set to work, her small hands gripping the mop with more strength than an 8-year-old should ever have to muster. The hours crawled by. Emily scrubbed and cleaned in silence, the sound of her rag dragging across the floor the only noise in the house. Ben, still too young to understand what was really going on, played quietly with his toys in the corner, blissfully unaware of the tension that permeated the air. Olivia had left the house to run errands, and though Emily found some small relief in her absence, the weight of her expectations still hung heavy over her. Every time she thought she had done enough, Olivia would return with a new demand, pointing out some invisible speck of dust or a wrinkle in the bedsheets that needed fixing. It was never enough. Emily was never enough in Olivia's eyes. But Emily didn't tell her father. She couldn't. Not when Olivia's threats echoed in her mind every night before she fell asleep. "If you tell him, I'll make sure Ben gets the same treatment." You wouldn't want that, would you? Emily had no choice but to comply. So she did the chores, kept her head down, and pretended that everything was fine when James was home. But the weight of it all was starting to crack her composure. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, James noticed that Emily was unusually quiet. She picked at her food, barely lifting her head as her father and Olivia chatted. Ben was as cheerful as ever, babbling on about the fun he had had that day building towers with his toy blocks. "Emily, sweetie, are you okay?" James asked, reaching out to gently touch her hand. Emily flinched slightly but forced a smile. "I'm fine, Daddy. Just tired." Olivia, sitting across the table, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Her cold gaze flickered between James and Emily, as though daring the young girl to say something more. "Tired, huh?" James chuckled softly. "Well, maybe tomorrow we can all go out for ice cream after lunch. It'll be a nice treat." Emily nodded, her smile tight. The promise of ice cream didn't bring her the usual excitement. All she could think about was how much she dreaded the hours before her father got home from work each day. The thought of what Olivia would make her do next churned in her stomach, more than the food in front of her ever could. The next few days were no different. Emily rose early each morning, dreading the long hours of chores and harsh words that awaited her. She did everything Olivia asked without complaint, knowing that even a moment of hesitation would lead to another threat, another reminder of the consequences if she ever dared tell James the truth. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of scrubbing floors and folding laundry, Emily dragged herself upstairs to her room. She had barely settled into bed when she heard the soft creak of the door opening. "Emily," Ben's small voice called out. She rolled over, blinking tiredly at her brother as he stood in the doorway, clutching his stuffed bear. "Can I sleep with you tonight?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Emily shifted over, making space for him in her bed. "Sure, Ben," she said quietly. "Come on." As Ben climbed into bed beside her, he curled up close, seeking comfort from his sister. Emily wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly as she fought back the tears that threatened to spill over. She had been holding it all in for so long, too long, and the pressure of it was becoming too much to bear. "Emily," Ben whispered into the darkness, "why is Olivia so mean to you?" Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't realized that Ben had noticed, and the thought of him being aware of the situation made her chest tighten. "She's not always like that," Emily whispered back, trying to keep her voice steady. "She's just strict." "But she's not strict with me," Ben said innocently. "She's only strict with you." Emily swallowed hard, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She didn't know how to explain it to her brother, didn't know how to make him understand that she was doing everything she could to protect him from Olivia's cruelty. "I'll be okay," she said softly, more to herself than to Ben. "Don't worry about me." But Ben didn't let it go. "I don't like it when she yells at you." Emily pressed her lips together, her throat tightening with emotion. "I know, Ben," she whispered, "but I'll take care of it. You don't have to worry." Ben nodded against her, his tiny body warm and safe in her arms. For a few moments, they lay there in silence, the weight of their unspoken fears pressing down on both of them. Eventually, Ben's breathing slowed, and Emily knew he had fallen asleep. But Emily stayed awake long after her brother drifted off. The darkness of the room felt suffocating, her thoughts swirling with uncertainty and dread. How much longer could she keep pretending everything was fine? How much longer could she endure Olivia's threats and cruelty? The burden of keeping the secret was becoming too heavy for her young shoulders to bear. As she stared up at the ceiling, Emily knew one thing for certain. Something had to change. She couldn't go on like this forever. The next morning, as Emily scrubbed the kitchen floor on her hands and knees, her mind was elsewhere. Olivia stood over her, as usual, barking orders and pointing out imaginary flaws in her work. But Emily barely registered the words. Her thoughts were consumed with a plan, a desperate, last-ditch effort to make things right. Maybe if she could just talk to her father alone. Without Olivia around, she could tell him the truth. She could explain everything. The chores, the threats, the fear she lived with every day. Maybe, just maybe, he would believe her, and things would finally get better. But the thought terrified her. What if Olivia found out? What if she made good on her threats to hurt Ben? Emily's heart raced at the thought. She couldn't let anything happen to Ben. She had sworn to protect him, no matter the cost. But how long could she keep this up? Her moment of contemplation was shattered by Olivia's sharp voice. "Emily, stop daydreaming and finish the floor. I swear, if I find a single dirty spot, you'll regret it." Emily swallowed hard, nodding obediently as she scrubbed harder. Her hands ached, her knees sore from kneeling on the hard tile, but she kept going. She had to. For Ben. But the cracks were beginning to show. Emily couldn't hide her exhaustion any longer. And soon enough, someone would notice. A heartbreaking discovery. The days had grown shorter as the autumn chill began to settle in, but for Emily, every day felt like an eternity. Time seemed to stretch as she worked under Olivia's oppressive rule. The weight of the secret was suffocating, pressing down on her chest, more and more with each passing hour. Every moment felt like a delicate balancing act, keeping Olivia's anger at bay while pretending everything was fine for her father's sake. On the surface, nothing seemed wrong. To anyone looking in from the outside, the Thompson household looked picture perfect. Olivia played the part of the doting stepmother whenever James was home. She was all smiles and kindness, taking the children to the park or making their favorite meals. But the moment James stepped out the door, the mask would drop, revealing the cold-hearted tyrant that lurked beneath. Emily's only solace was her younger brother, Ben. His innocent laughter, his unyielding love for her, was the thread that kept her tethered to hope. As long as she could protect him from Olivia's wrath, she could endure the cruelty herself. But lately, even that small light had started to flicker. She was growing tired, exhausted in both body and spirit. One Friday afternoon, the weight became too much to bear. James had promised to take the family out for a special dinner that evening, a way to celebrate the end of a particularly busy week. He had been working late every night, and Emily had barely seen him. That Friday morning, as they ate breakfast together, he told her and Ben to be ready for a surprise later that night. "You'll love it," James said with a grin, ruffling Ben's hair. "It'll be just the three of us. A fun family night." Emily smiled, but her heart was heavy. She longed for those moments with her father, the carefree dinners, the laughter that used to fill their home. But the reality was that those moments were few and far between now. Olivia always found a way to insert herself, making it clear that the children were secondary in her eyes. After breakfast, James left for work, giving Emily and Ben a hug before he headed out the door. The moment the car disappeared down the street, Olivia's demeanor shifted, as it always did. "Emily," she said curtly, crossing her arms over her chest, "I want this house spotless before your father gets home. We're going out tonight, and if the house isn't perfect, you'll be staying behind." Emily's stomach dropped. She had been looking forward to the night out with her father. It had been weeks since they had done anything together, just the three of them, and the idea of missing out filled her with dread. She nodded, keeping her eyes downcast. "Yes, Olivia. And make sure you don't cut corners this time," Olivia added, her voice dripping with condescension. "If I find so much as a speck of dust, I'll know. You can forget about dinner if that happens." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat and got to work. She scrubbed the floors, cleaned the bathroom, dusted the shelves. Anything Olivia demanded of her, she did without question. But no matter how hard she worked, it never seemed to be enough. Olivia always found fault in something. "Are you blind, or just incompetent?" Olivia snapped later in the afternoon as she ran her finger along the windowsill. "There's dust here. Do it again." Emily bit the inside of her cheek, fighting back tears. She had already cleaned the windowsill twice, but arguing with Olivia would only make things worse. She silently grabbed the rag and began wiping it down once more, her hands trembling with frustration. Ben, oblivious to the tension, played with his toys in the living room. Every now and then, he would ask Emily to join him, but she always had to decline, much to his disappointment. She hated seeing the sadness in his eyes, but she couldn't risk disobeying Olivia. "Emily, can you play with me?" Ben asked again, this time holding up a stuffed dinosaur. Emily smiled at him, trying to hide the exhaustion in her voice. "Maybe later, Benny. I have to finish cleaning." Before Ben could respond, Olivia's sharp voice cut through the air. "No, she won't be playing with you. She still has the laundry to fold after this. So stop asking." Ben's face fell, and Emily's heart broke a little more. But there was nothing she could do. She had learned long ago that defiance only made things worse. The hours ticked by painfully slowly, but eventually Emily finished her chores. As she folded the last towel and placed it on the pile, her mind wandered to the promise her father had made that morning. "A fun family night," she whispered to herself. She wanted so desperately for that to be true. She needed one night, just one, where everything felt normal again, where she could laugh and be carefree like she used to be. But in the back of her mind, the familiar fear lingered. Olivia would find some excuse to ruin it, as she always did. By the time evening rolled around, Emily was exhausted. She sat at the kitchen table, her legs sore from standing all day, waiting for her father to return home. Ben sat beside her, playing with his toy cars, but Emily's thoughts were elsewhere. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she heard the sound of James's car pulling into the driveway. Her heart lifted a little, but that hope was quickly dashed when Olivia's cold eyes fixed on her. "I hope you didn't forget any spots," Olivia said quietly, her voice filled with warning. "If I find something wrong, you'll regret it." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She had done everything Olivia had asked. She had cleaned every inch of the house, but the fear of missing something small gnawed at her. What if Olivia found some tiny mistake and used it as an excuse to keep her from going to dinner? The front door opened, and James stepped inside with a cheerful smile. "There's my crew," he said, his voice full of warmth. "Are you ready for a night out?" Ben jumped up from his seat, running to greet his father with a hug. "Where are we going, Daddy? Where's the surprise?" James chuckled, ruffling Ben's hair. "You'll see, little man. It's going to be a fun night." Emily forced herself to smile, standing up slowly from the table. But just as she moved to join them, Olivia's voice sliced through the air like a knife. "James," she said sweetly, stepping forward with a concerned expression. Before we go, I think you should take a look at something. James's smile faltered slightly. What's wrong? Olivia gestured toward the living room. I asked Emily to clean the house today, but I'm afraid she might have missed a few things. I wouldn't want her to think that half-done work is acceptable, you know. We have to teach her responsibility. James's brow furrowed as he looked at Emily, confusion in his eyes. Did you clean like I asked, Emily? Emily's heart raced, her face growing hot with shame and fear. I did, Daddy. I cleaned everything. I promise. Olivia gave a soft, pitying sigh and pointed to the corner of the living room, where a small smudge of dirt could barely be seen on the floorboards. I found this, she said softly. I'm sure it was just an oversight, but still, she didn't finish the job. Emily's chest tightened as she stared at the small patch of dirt. It was so tiny, so insignificant, but to Olivia, it was the perfect excuse to humiliate her. James glanced between Olivia and Emily, clearly unsure of what to do. It's just a little dirt, he said hesitantly. I'm sure she can clean it quickly, and then we can go. Olivia's smile was tight, her eyes hard as she replied. Of course, but it's about setting expectations, James. If we let her think it's okay to cut corners, she'll never learn. Emily's stomach churned with anxiety as she watched her father's face. Would he side with Olivia? Would he believe that Emily hadn't done enough? She had worked so hard, done everything she could to make sure the house was spotless, and now it felt like it had all been for nothing. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right, he said finally. Emily, just clean up that spot quickly, and then we'll head out. Emily nodded, tears burning at the back of her eyes. She grabbed the rag and bent down to scrub the floor, her hands shaking. The smudge came off easily, but the damage had already been done. Olivia had found a way to make her feel small again, to remind her that no matter how hard she tried, it would never be enough. Good job, sweetie, Olivia said, her voice sickeningly sweet as she patted Emily on the head. Now we can go. Emily stood up, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill. She couldn't let her father see her cry. She wouldn't give Olivia the satisfaction. The drive to the restaurant was quiet. Ben, sensing the tension, kept close to his sister, holding her hand in the backseat. Emily squeezed his hand back, grateful for his silent comfort. When they finally arrived at the restaurant, James tried to lighten the mood, ordering their favorite foods and telling funny stories from work. Ben giggled, enjoying the attention, but Emily remained quiet, her appetite gone. She picked at her food, her mind still replaying the scene at home. James noticed. Emily, are you okay? He asked, leaning forward with concern. You haven't eaten much. I'm fine, Emily mumbled, forcing a small smile. Just tired. Olivia shot her a warning glance, and Emily looked down at her plate, too scared to say anything more. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, and by the time they returned home, Emily was exhausted, physically and emotionally. As she lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, she felt a sense of hopelessness settle over her. No matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she tried to please Olivia, it was never enough. She was trapped in a nightmare that she couldn't escape from, and the worst part was that her father didn't see it. He didn't know what was really going on behind closed doors. Something had to change. But how? The breaking point. The following days seemed to stretch endlessly, as if time itself had slowed down to mirror the exhaustion that had settled into Emily's bones. She was drained, not just physically from the relentless chores Olivia piled on her, but emotionally as well. Her mind swirled with fear and anxiety. She wanted to tell her father the truth, to let him know how Olivia treated her when he wasn't around. But every time she even considered it, Olivia's voice would echo in her mind. If you tell him, I'll make sure Ben gets the same treatment. You wouldn't want that, would you? The thought of Ben, her sweet little brother, enduring what she went through, kept her silent. He was the reason she kept going, kept hiding the truth. For as long as she could protect him, she would endure Olivia's cruelty. But the weight of her secret was growing heavier. Her once bright spirit had dimmed, and it was becoming more and more difficult to keep up the facade of normalcy. Her father had noticed too. Though James had been busy with work, even he couldn't ignore the change in his daughter's behavior. One evening after dinner, James pulled Emily aside as she helped clear the dishes. "Hey, sweetheart," he said gently, crouching down to her level. "You've been really quiet lately. Is everything okay?" Emily felt her heart skip a beat. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She glanced over her shoulder and saw Olivia standing in the doorway, her expression neutral but her eyes cold and watchful. Emily knew exactly what that look meant. If she said anything, there would be consequences later. "I'm fine, Daddy," Emily said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just a little tired from school, that's all." James frowned, clearly not satisfied with her answer. "Are you sure? You can tell me anything. You know that, right?" Emily nodded, her stomach twisting with guilt. She hated lying to him, but she hated the thought of what Olivia might do even more. "Okay," James said finally, giving her a small smile. "But if anything's bothering you, I'm always here to listen." Emily nodded again, then turned back to the sink to wash the dishes. As she scrubbed the plates, her hands trembling slightly, she could feel Olivia's gaze boring into her from across the room. The next day was a Saturday, a day that Emily once would have looked forward to. But now, Saturdays were just another day of endless chores. James had a work event to attend in the morning, which meant Olivia would be in charge until the afternoon. Emily dreaded the weekends more than anything, because it meant longer stretches of time alone with her stepmother. As soon as James left, Olivia's mask fell away, and the familiar sneer appeared on her face. "Well, since your father's off playing the good little businessman, you and I are going to get some real work done," Olivia said, her voice sharp. "I want the entire house cleaned, top to bottom. And don't even think about cutting corners this time. If I find one thing out of place, you'll regret it." Emily nodded silently, her stomach already in knots. She had learned long ago not to argue. Instead, she simply did what Olivia asked, hoping to avoid another confrontation. Ben, unaware of the tension in the air, played happily in the living room with his toys. By mid-morning, Emily had scrubbed the floors, dusted the furniture, and cleaned the kitchen. Her arms ached from the effort, but she pushed through, determined not to give Olivia any reason to lash out. Just as she finished wiping down the bathroom sink, Olivia appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed. "You missed a spot," she said coldly, pointing to a tiny water stain on the mirror. Emily blinked, her heart sinking. She had cleaned the mirror 3 times already, but Olivia always found something to criticize. Without a word, she grabbed the rag and wiped it down again. "That's more like it," Olivia said, her voice laced with contempt. "Honestly, I don't know why your father lets you get away with being so lazy. If I were in charge, you'd be doing a lot more than this." Emily bit her lip, fighting back the tears that were threatening to spill. She couldn't let Olivia see her cry. She wouldn't give her the satisfaction. The afternoon dragged on, with Olivia finding new tasks for Emily to complete at every turn. By the time Emily finished cleaning the living room, she was utterly exhausted. Her hands were raw from scrubbing, and her legs felt like they could give out at any moment. Can I go play with Ben now?" Emily asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Olivia's eyes narrowed. "Play? You think you deserve to play after that half-hearted job you did in the kitchen? I think not." Emily's chest tightened with frustration and exhaustion. "But I've done everything you asked," she said, her voice trembling. "Please." Olivia's expression darkened. "Don't you dare argue with me, you ungrateful little brat," she hissed, stepping closer. "You think just because your father spoils you, you can get away with anything. Well, not in this house. I make the rules when he's not here, and you'd better remember that." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to scream, to yell, to tell Olivia how unfair she was being. But she couldn't. Not with Ben in the next room. If Olivia's anger turned on him, she swallowed her pride and nodded. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Olivia smirked, satisfied with her submission. "That's what I thought. Now go finish the laundry, and if I hear one more word out of you, you'll be scrubbing the floors again before your father gets home." Emily's hands trembled as she gathered the laundry and carried it to the washing machine. The weight of Olivia's cruelty pressed down on her like a physical burden. How long could she keep doing this? How long could she keep pretending that everything was fine? As she loaded the clothes into the machine, tears welled up in her eyes. She couldn't keep this up much longer. She felt like she was on the verge of breaking, and the thought terrified her. But before she could dwell on it further, she heard the sound of Ben's voice from the living room. "Emily, can you come play now?" Ben called out, his voice filled with hope. "I built a big tower." Emily wiped away her tears quickly, forcing a smile as she stepped into the living room. "That sounds great, Benny," she said softly. "Let me just finish the laundry first, okay?" Ben's face lit up with excitement. "Okay." As she turned back to the washing machine, Emily felt a surge of determination. She had to stay strong. For Ben. No matter how hard things got, she couldn't let him know the full extent of what was happening. She had to protect him. But as the afternoon wore on, Emily's resolve began to crumble. Every time she caught a glimpse of Olivia's cold gaze, the fear gnawed at her. What if she couldn't protect Ben anymore? What if something happened to him because she wasn't strong enough? Just as those dark thoughts began to spiral, the sound of James's car pulling into the driveway jolted her from her despair. Relief washed over her like a wave. Her father was home. For now, at least things would be okay. James entered the house with his usual warm smile, giving Ben a hug and ruffling Emily's hair. "There's my crew," he said, his voice full of affection. "Did you two have a good day?" Ben beamed up at him. "Yeah, Daddy. I built a huge tower." James chuckled. "That sounds awesome, buddy. I can't wait to see it." Emily forced a smile, trying to mask the exhaustion and fear that had been her constant companions all day. But James noticed the tired look in her eyes. "Emily, you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "You look a little worn out." Olivia, ever the master of manipulation, spoke up before Emily could answer. "She's just tired from helping around the house today," she said sweetly. "She was a little slow getting things done, but we made it work." James frowned, looking at Emily with a worried expression. "Slow? You've been working all day." Emily opened her mouth to speak, but Olivia's sharp glance silenced her. The threat in Olivia's eyes was clear. "Say something, and you'll regret it." "I'm fine, Daddy," Emily said quietly, lowering her gaze. "Just a little tired." James didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he suggested they all sit down for dinner, trying to lighten the mood. Emily went through the motions, eating her food quietly and smiling when appropriate, but her mind was elsewhere. As the evening wore on, the knot in her stomach tightened. She couldn't keep doing this. She couldn't keep pretending. The weight of the secret was crushing her, and she was running out of strength to carry it. Later that night, as Emily lay in bed, her thoughts raced. Her father had noticed something was wrong, but Olivia's manipulation had prevented her from saying anything. How long could she keep up this charade? How long before her father figured it out on his own? And what would happen when he did? Emily stared up at the ceiling, her heart pounding in her chest. She was reaching her breaking point. Something had to change. But how? Just as she began to drift off to sleep, a new thought pierced through the fog of exhaustion. Maybe she didn't have to wait for her father to figure it out. Maybe there was another way. Her mind raced as the plan began to form. It was risky, terrifying, even, but it might be her only chance to end this nightmare once and for all. She had to be brave. For herself. For Ben. And tomorrow, Tomorrow would be the day everything changed. The truth unveiled. The next morning, Emily woke up with a strange mixture of fear and determination swirling in her chest. The plan that had taken root in her mind the night before was still there, growing in strength as she stared up at the ceiling, mentally preparing herself for what she needed to do. Today, everything would change. For too long, she had been carrying this secret, this unbearable weight of Olivia's cruelty, on her small shoulders. She had done it to protect Ben, to shield him from the worst of Olivia's harshness. But now, she knew that if she didn't act soon, things might get worse. She couldn't let that happen. She had to take the risk and tell her father the truth, no matter the consequences. But she couldn't just tell them. Olivia was too good at covering her tracks, too skilled at making herself look innocent. Emily needed proof. She slid out of bed quietly, her heart racing in her chest. Ben was still asleep in his bed, his small body curled up under the covers, his stuffed dinosaur clutched tightly in his arms. Emily's heart ached with love for her brother. He was the reason she had endured so much, and he was the reason she needed to be brave today. She tiptoed to the door and peered down the hallway. It was still early, and the house was quiet. Olivia was likely still asleep, and her father wouldn't be back from his morning jog for another hour. Emily took a deep breath and crept down the stairs. The house felt eerie in the early morning light, the silence heavy with the tension that had become all too familiar. She walked over to the living room and picked up her father's old digital voice recorder from the bookshelf. He used it for work sometimes, dictating notes and ideas. It was small, easily concealable, and exactly what she needed. Her hands trembled as she turned it on, making sure it was working. A small red light blinked, indicating it was recording. Emily swallowed hard. This was her chance to capture the truth, to show her father the side of Olivia that she kept hidden from him. If she could just get Olivia to drop her mask while the recorder was on, then maybe, just maybe, her father would finally see what had been happening all along. With the recorder safely tucked into the pocket of her hoodie, Emily headed back upstairs to start the day. She felt sick with nerves, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it would wake Ben. But she knew she couldn't back out now. She had to go through with it. By the time she reached the top of the stairs, she could hear Olivia moving around in her room, her footsteps heavy on the hardwood floors. Emily's pulse quickened. This was it. It was time. She entered the hallway cautiously, her heart pounding, and knocked softly on Olivia's door. "Come in," Olivia's voice called out sharply. Emily stepped into the room, keeping her eyes downcast to avoid the woman's icy glare. Olivia stood by the window, brushing her hair, her reflection cold and impassive in the mirror. The room smelled of the expensive perfume she always wore, a scent that now made Emily's stomach churn. "What do you want?" Olivia asked, not bothering to hide the annoyance in her voice. Emily took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the recorder in her pocket as if to remind herself of its presence. She had to play this carefully. "I just wanted to let you know that I finished my chores," Emily said quietly, keeping her voice steady. "I cleaned the kitchen and the bathroom, like you asked." Olivia's eyes flicked toward her in the mirror, narrowing slightly. "Is that so?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'll be the judge of that." Emily nodded, holding her breath as she waited for the inevitable criticism. Olivia's cruelty was always worse when she felt she had something to prove. Olivia turned to face her fully, setting down the brush and crossing her arms over her chest. "Do you think you deserve some sort of reward for doing the bare minimum?" she sneered. "I'm not your maid, Emily. If you expect praise every time you clean a floor, you're even more useless than I thought." Emily's chest tightened, but she forced herself to stand still. This was what she needed, the proof of how Olivia treated her when James wasn't around. Every cruel word, every threat would be captured on the recorder. She just had to keep pushing. "I'm sorry," Emily whispered, lowering her gaze. "I didn't mean to upset you." "Of course you didn't," Olivia said with a smirk, her voice growing colder. "But somehow you always manage to." Do you know why that is, Emily? Emily shook her head, her heart racing as Olivia stepped closer, her shadow looming over the young girl. Because you're weak, Olivia hissed. You're pathetic. Your father might be blind to it. But I see you for what you really are, a burden. A lazy, spoiled brat who thinks she can get away with anything just because her daddy loves her. But I'm not your daddy, and I'm not fooled by your little innocent act. You don't fool me, Emily. Tears stung the back of Emily's eyes, but she held them back, refusing to let Olivia see her cry. She had to stay strong for Ben, for her father, for herself. The recorder was still safely tucked in her pocket, capturing every venomous word that spilled from Olivia's lips. I try my best, Emily whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I'm sorry if it's not enough. Olivia's eyes gleamed with malice as she stepped even closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Oh, it's not enough. It will never be enough. You're worthless, Emily, and if you think for 1 second that your father would believe anything you say over me, you're delusional. I'm the only reason this house hasn't fallen apart. He needs me, not you. The venom in Olivia's voice sent chills down Emily's spine. She had heard Olivia say cruel things before, but never like this. The sheer hatred in her words was terrifying, and for a moment, Emily wondered if Olivia might actually hurt her if she pushed too far. But then, Olivia's voice softened into something even more chilling. And don't forget, she whispered, her lips curling into a cruel smile. If you ever tell your father what really happens when he's not around, I'll make sure Ben suffers for it. You wouldn't want that, would you? Emily's heart clenched in fear, her breath catching in her throat. She had expected Olivia to be cruel, but this direct threat against Ben was more than she had anticipated. For a moment, she considered abandoning the plan altogether, terrified of what Olivia might do if she found out about the recorder. But then Emily thought about Ben's innocent face, his laughter, his trust in her. She couldn't let this go on. She couldn't let Olivia continue to manipulate and threaten them. She had to be brave. With her heart pounding in her chest, Emily took a step back. I'm sorry, she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. I won't say anything. I promise. Olivia smirked, clearly satisfied with her victory. Good, she said, turning back to the mirror. Now get out of here. I don't want to see your face until dinner. Emily nodded quickly and hurried out of the room, her pulse racing as she made her way down the stairs. Once she reached the safety of the living room, she pulled the recorder from her pocket and turned it off. Her hands were shaking, but she felt a small surge of relief knowing that she had done it. She had captured everything. The insults, the threats. It was all there. But now came the hardest part. She had to show it to her father. Emily waited anxiously all afternoon, her stomach in knots as she replayed the conversation with Olivia over and over in her mind. What if her father didn't believe her? What if Olivia found a way to twist the story and make it seem like Emily had exaggerated or made it all up? By the time James returned home that evening, Emily's nerves were frayed. She had to fight the urge to blurt everything out the moment he walked through the door, but she knew she needed to wait for the right moment. Dinner passed in a blur, with Olivia wearing her usual mask of sweetness, smiling and laughing as if nothing had happened. Emily barely touched her food, too nervous to eat. After dinner, Emily found her moment. "Daddy, can I talk to you?" she asked quietly, catching him as he was clearing the table. James looked down at her, concern flickering in his eyes. "Of course, sweetheart," he said, setting the dishes down. "What's on your mind?" Emily glanced toward the living room, where Olivia was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She lowered her voice. "Can we talk in private?" James's brow furrowed, but he nodded and led her into his office, closing the door behind them. He sat down at his desk, looking at her with a gentle but worried expression. "What's going on, Emily?" he asked softly. "You've been acting strange for a while now. Is everything okay?" Emily took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she pulled the recorder from her pocket and held it out to him. "I need you to listen to this," she said quietly. James frowned, clearly confused, but he took the recorder from her and pressed play. As the recording played, the room filled with the sound of Olivia's cold, venomous words. Emily watched her father's face closely, her heart pounding in her chest. At first, his expression was one of disbelief, but as the recording went on, his face grew pale, his eyes widening with shock. By the time the recording ended, James looked like he had been punched in the gut. "Emily," he whispered, his voice shaking. "How long has this been going on?" Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she finally let the truth spill out. "A long time, Daddy. I didn't tell you because I was scared. She said if I told you, she'd hurt Ben. I didn't know what to do." James's face was a mixture of heartbreak and fury as he pulled Emily into his arms, holding her tightly. "Oh, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have noticed." Emily sobbed into his chest, the weight of months of fear and pain finally pouring out of her. "I didn't want to lie to you," she whispered, "but I didn't know how to stop her." James held her even tighter, his own tears falling now. "It's over, Emily," he said, his voice full of determination. "I promise you, it's over. She's never going to hurt you or Ben again." With that promise, Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. The nightmare was finally ending. But for Olivia, the real consequences were just beginning. A family reborn. The weight of the recording hung in the air long after it finished playing. James sat at his desk, still holding the voice recorder in his trembling hands, as though unable to fully comprehend the enormity of what he had just heard. His heart shattered into pieces as Olivia's cruel words echoed in his mind. How had he been so blind? How had he let this go on for so long, right under his nose? And his sweet, brave Emily. How had she endured so much without saying a word? Emily stood in front of him, her eyes puffy from tears, still looking small and fragile despite the courage it had taken to bring him the proof. The depth of her fear was written in the way she stood, unsure if she had done the right thing, unsure of what might happen next. But James could only see the unimaginable strength she had shown. His heart ached for her, and his chest tightened with both sorrow and fury. "Emily," James said softly, pulling her into his arms again. "I'm so proud of you. You were so brave to tell me. I should have seen it sooner. I'm so sorry." Emily pressed her face into her father's chest, her small body trembling with the release of months of pent-up fear and pain. "I didn't know how to stop her," she whispered through her tears. "She said she would hurt Ben if I told you. I was so scared." James felt a fresh wave of anger and guilt wash over him. His sweet little girl had been fighting a silent battle to protect her brother, all while he had been oblivious to the nightmare unfolding in his own home. He took a deep breath, his voice low but firm. "Emily, I promise you, she's never going to hurt you or Ben again. I'll make sure of it." He gently pulled away from her, looking into her tear-filled eyes. "I need you to stay in here for a little while, okay? I'm going to talk to Olivia." Emily's eyes widened with fear. "What if she gets mad?" "She won't have the chance," James said with quiet determination. "It's over. She's leaving tonight." Emily hesitated but nodded. Her trust in her father had never wavered, even through all of this, and now that she had told him the truth, she felt a small sliver of hope begin to grow. She watched as James stood up, his face hardening into a look she had never seen before, a look of controlled, righteous anger. James walked toward the door, his heart pounding with a mixture of fury and protectiveness. He paused for a moment, glancing back at Emily. "I love you, sweetheart. I'll be right back." With that, he stepped out of the office, closing the door gently behind him. In the living room, Olivia sat on the couch, her phone in hand, scrolling idly through social media. The contrast between her calm demeanor and the reality of what had just transpired upstairs made James's blood boil. The very sight of her now filled him with a rage he hadn't known he was capable of. "Olivia," James called out, his voice steady but cold. She looked up, her face brightening with a practiced smile. "James, there you are. Is everything all right?" James didn't answer. Instead, he crossed the room with purposeful strides and stood in front of her. His eyes locked onto hers. Olivia's smile faltered slightly, sensing something was wrong, but she didn't let it show. She placed her phone down and tilted her head with feigned concern. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice laced with an artificial sweetness that James could now see through entirely. Without a word, James reached into his pocket and pulled out the voice recorder. He pressed play. The room filled with the sound of Olivia's voice, sharp and venomous, echoing through the space like a dark cloud. Her cruel words spilled out, the insults, the threats, every hateful thing she had said to Emily when she thought no one was listening. Olivia's face drained of color. She stood abruptly, her eyes wide with panic as the recording continued to play. "James, she stammered, her voice shaking. "This isn't." "Save it," James interrupted, his voice low and dangerous. "I heard everything. I saw everything. How long have you been treating my daughter like this? How long have you been terrorizing her?" Olivia's mouth opened and closed, her mind racing for an excuse, a lie, anything to salvage the situation. But James's cold, unforgiving stare silenced her. She had underestimated him. For months, she had been able to manipulate him, to deceive him into thinking she was the perfect partner, the perfect stepmother. But now, her carefully constructed facade was crumbling before her eyes. "I can explain," Olivia said weakly, trying to regain control. "I was under a lot of stress. I didn't mean it. I was just." "You threatened my daughter," James said through clenched teeth, stepping closer to her. "You called her worthless. You made her afraid to tell me the truth. You treated her like a slave in her own home. How could you do this? How could you pretend to care about this family while you were destroying it behind my back?" Olivia's face twisted in desperation. "James, please, you have to understand." "No," he said, his voice full of finality. "I don't need to understand anything. What I do understand is that you are never coming near my children again. Pack your things and leave. Now." For a moment, Olivia just stood there, frozen in place as the reality of the situation sank in. The fear in her eyes was no longer just about losing her grip on Emily and Ben. It was about losing everything. The comfortable life she had hoped to secure through her manipulation of James, the financial stability, the status. And now it was all slipping through her fingers. "You can't do this," Olivia hissed, her desperation quickly turning to anger. "You need me. I've been the one holding this family together. You think you can raise those kids on your own? Without me, this house would fall apart." James stared at her, his expression unflinching. "I've raised those kids on my own before you ever came into the picture. And I'll continue to do it after you're gone. You were never the glue that held this family together. You were the poison that nearly tore it apart." Olivia's face contorted in fury, but James didn't back down. "I'll give you 1 hour to pack your things," he said coldly. "After that, if you're not gone, I'm calling the police." For a long moment, Olivia said nothing, her eyes burning with rage. But she could see that there was no winning this battle. She had lost. She had been exposed, and there was no escaping the consequences. With a furious glare, she stormed past James and headed upstairs to pack her belongings. As James watched her go, he felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. The anger was still there, burning in his chest, but now it was tempered by a fierce protectiveness for his children. It was over. Olivia was leaving, and Emily and Ben were safe. Once Olivia had packed and slammed the front door behind her, leaving their lives for good, James stood in the empty living room, letting the silence settle over him. It felt surreal, like waking up from a long nightmare. But the nightmare was real. And now that Olivia was gone, the healing would need to begin. James walked upstairs and gently knocked on the office door, where Emily was still waiting. "Sweetheart, it's over," he said softly as he opened the door. "She's gone." Emily looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and uncertainty. "Really?" "Really," James confirmed, kneeling down beside her. "She's never coming back. You and Ben are safe now. I promise." Emily's lip quivered, and she threw her arms around her father, clinging to him as if she were afraid that if she let go, the nightmare would return. James held her tightly, stroking her hair and whispering reassurances. "I'm so sorry, Emily," he murmured. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you better. But I promise, from now on, I'll never let anyone hurt you like that again." Emily sobbed into his chest, all the fear and pain she had been holding inside finally spilling out. James rocked her gently, his heart breaking for all she had endured. But as they held each other, a new strength began to grow in both of them, a strength rooted in the love they had always shared but had been tested in ways neither of them could have imagined. After a few minutes, Ben peeked into the room, his innocent eyes full of confusion. "Is Olivia gone?" he asked, his voice small. James smiled softly and held out his hand. "Yeah, buddy, she's gone. Come here." Ben hesitated for a moment, then ran to his father, climbing into his lap. "Are we going to be okay, Daddy?" he asked, looking up at him with wide eyes. James nodded, pulling both of his children close. "We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be great. It's just us now, and we're going to take care of each other." Emily sniffled, wiping her eyes as she looked at her father and brother. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe. She wasn't carrying the burden alone anymore. They were a team, just like her father always said. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to herself, letting the truth of those words sink in. In the days that followed, the house felt lighter, freer, without Olivia's oppressive presence. James took time off work to be with the children, to help them process what had happened and begin healing. He enrolled them in therapy, knowing that the trauma of the past months wouldn't disappear overnight, but also knowing that they were strong enough to overcome it, together. Emily's teachers noticed a change in her almost immediately. The quiet, withdrawn girl who had struggled in class was starting to come back to life. Her grades improved, and she began participating in activities again, her love for art rekindled in the freedom she now felt. Ben, too, seemed happier, though his questions about Olivia still lingered. James answered them honestly but gently, assuring his son that everything was going to be all right now. As the days turned into weeks, the Thompson family found a new rhythm, one that wasn't marked by fear or tension, but by love, laughter, and healing. They spent weekends at the park, built blanket forts in the living room, and shared meals that were filled with conversation and warmth. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emily turned to her father, a small smile playing on her lips. "Daddy?" she asked softly. "Yeah, sweetheart. I'm really happy it's just us," she said, leaning her head against his arm. "I feel safe now." James's heart swelled with emotion, and he kissed the top of her head. "Me too, Emily. Me too." For the first time in a long time, James felt at peace. His family was whole again. They had been through a storm, but they had come out stronger on the other side. And as long as they had each other, nothing could tear them apart. They were free, and together, they were going to be just fine.